What happens when destiny arrives without warning? Would you step into the light or retreat into the familiar shadows? Sometimes life's greatest invitations come disguised as fear, and for Jessica Parker, that moment was already quietly unfolding, moving toward her with the inevitability of a rising tide. Jessica had never expected to be noticed. Her life had been lived behind the curtains, in the soft hum of background noise, beneath the fluorescent lights of those more important than her. She had long since chosen invisibility, wore it like a protective cloak, a shield forged from years of being underestimated. But sometimes fate doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes it calls on the least likely person. Sometimes it calls on the least likely person who to do something extraordinary. That morning, the Skyline Suites bustled with more urgency than usual. The staff was in high gear, racing against the clock to prepare for the Miles Industries Global Summit, an exclusive event welcoming over 50 high-ranking executives from companies across the world. Whispers spread through the staff lounge that Adrian Miles himself would be in attendance, the youngest CEO on the Fortune 500 list. Adrian was known for his disruptive ideas and a gaze that could slice through both pretense and potential alike. "No mistakes, not today," barked Chloe Winters, the hotel's event manager. During the morning staff briefing, her tone was clipped, her eyes sharp as they landed on Jessica. "Everyone stays in their lane. Do your job. No improvising, no heroics." Jessica nodded automatically. She had grown used to these meetings, and more importantly to the dismissive way people like Chloe looked at her, like she was a background prop rather than a person. Her name tag may have said Jessica, but to most she was simply the cleaner. As the crowd dispersed, Jessica happened to overhear Chloe whisper to Marcus, the front desk supervisor, "Put Jessica on the 14th floor today. That's where the Chinese delegation is staying. At least there, no one has to watch her fumble through basic English." Jessica's cheeks flamed, but she didn't turn around. She didn't protest. Instead, she bit down on her lip so hard it almost bled. If only Chloe knew she could quote Lucian fluently, that she could recite Tang poetry with tonal precision. If only Chloe had ever seen her. But people like Chloe rarely saw anyone beyond the surface. "14th floor, huh?" came a voice from behind. Jessica turned to see Henry, the hotel's night security guard. 67 years old, worn but not weary, Henry had a way of noticing things most people missed. "Funny thing about the universe," he said as the elevator dinged. "It has a strange way of placing us exactly where we need to be. Not too early, not too late." Jessica gave a half smile, equal parts resignation and cynicism. "It's just Chloe. She doesn't think I'm polished enough to be around American executives." Henry chuckled softly. "Maybe so. Or maybe something unexpected is waiting up there." As the elevator doors slid open, he added, "Just remember what I told you, kid. Don't let the best parts of yourself die in silence. That's the greatest tragedy of all." Jessica stepped into the elevator alone, the silence around her broken only by the humming of cables and her racing heartbeat. She didn't know it yet, but the elevator wasn't just lifting her to another floor. It was carrying her straight toward the moment her life would change forever. The 14th floor was unusually quiet. Most of the guests were attending the conference, so Jessica moved quickly through her tasks. Every now and then she murmured Mandarin phrases under her breath, part pronunciation practice, part a way to keep something alive inside her. In room 1412, a magazine lay open on the desk. Her eyes were drawn to the glossy page. Adrian Miles stared out from the cover, his gaze sharp yet contemplative. The headline read boldly, "Miles Industries expands into Asian markets. CEO pursues cultural connection over corporate conquest." That afternoon, she moved on to clean the VIP lounge, a quiet space reserved for executives between sessions. She assumed she was alone, working in her usual rhythm, when suddenly a voice burst from the adjacent room. "No, that's not what I meant," a man's voice barked into the phone, laced with frustration. "Yes, I understand there's a language barrier, but this deal is too important to collapse over a miscommunication." Jessica tried to focus on her work, but the voice was getting louder, more desperate. "Hello? Is anyone there? Can someone please translate? This is insane. I need someone who speaks Mandarin. Right now." Peering through the narrow crack in the door, she saw a tall man pacing back and forth, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, sweat dampening the collar of his shirt. Adrian Miles, no doubt about it, the same man from the magazine, now undone by a language he didn't speak. Jessica froze. Her pulse thundered. She could help. She wanted to help, but to approach him, to step out from the safety of her shadow into the attention of a powerful CEO, her palms turned slick with fear. What if she mispronounced something? What if he laughed, or worse, dismissed her entirely? Then Henry's voice came back to her as vivid as if he were standing beside her. "Don't let the best parts of you die in silence." For 3 years she had carried her mother's dreams. For 3 years she had buried her talent like it was a burden. But this moment, this unraveling phone call, this fragile opportunity, was a gift from fate. One that had never been promised and might never return. Jessica stood between two worlds. One was familiar, shaped by the habit of shrinking. The other beckoned with risk, unknown but alive with the possibility of courage, if only for a single moment. Agent's voice grew louder, nearly shouting now. "Can anyone help? This is the most important contract of the quarter. Jung Corporation is about to drop the call." Jessica inhaled sharply. Then again. Her hand trembled. She turned to leave. An instinct she had followed 1,000 times before. But then, in the reflective gleam of the elevator doors, she saw herself, small, hunched, vanishing. And behind that reflection she imagined her mother's face, full of unfulfilled dreams. Before she could stop herself, her feet were already turning back. "Excuse me." Her voice came out barely a whisper. Adrian didn't even hear it. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me, Mr. Miles, I speak Mandarin. If you'd like, I could help." Adrian turned, startled to see the young woman in a housekeeping uniform standing nervously beside her cart. For a second, she thought he'd brush her off. But desperation overruled doubt. "You speak Mandarin?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice. Jessica nodded, her mouth dry. "Yes, I can translate if you'd like." Adrian hesitated for only a beat, then handed her the phone. "This is the CEO of Young Corporation in Shanghai. We're negotiating manufacturing terms, but something's getting lost in translation." Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she took the phone, but the moment she began to speak in Mandarin, everything shifted. Her voice flowed smooth and confident. The tones were crisp, the rhythm natural, like air after holding your breath too long. She introduced herself, summarized the situation, then launched into translating with a precision that left no doubt. The voice on the other end was rapid, formal, and demanding, but Jessica didn't flinch. Every word, every cultural nuance she carried across the language divide with grace and clarity. The call lasted 15 minutes. Misunderstandings cleared, tension melted, laughter even bubbled up when she cleverly explained a phrase that had been misinterpreted as offensive. When it was over, she quietly handed the phone back. And it was only in that moment, when the call had ended and silence reclaimed the room, that Jessica truly realized she had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows, she had been seen, and for the first time, Adrian Miles was really looking at her, not with pity, not with doubt, but with a curious intensity, like he had just discovered something valuable that had been hidden in plain sight. "I'm sorry for interrupting," Jessica said quickly, stepping back toward the door. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Adrienne called out, but Jessica had already turned, her cheeks blazing with embarrassment. Her heart pounded, and all she wanted was to disappear, like she always had. "Thank you," Adrienne called after her. But she was gone, taking the service stairs instead of the elevator. She didn't want anyone to see her shaking hands. She didn't want anyone to see how much it had cost her to speak up. For the rest of her shift, her mind spun between exhilaration and dread. In those 15 fleeting minutes, she had stepped beyond her invisible borders. She had been more than useful. She had been necessary. But by the end of the day, reality crept back in. Tomorrow she would be Jessica the housekeeper again. That moment would fade, wouldn't it? That's what she believed. Until she reached the staff exit and saw Henry waiting there, leaning casually against the wall, a knowing smile dancing in the corners of his weathered face. "Heard something interesting happened on the 14th floor today," he said, like it was just another evening. Jessica stiffened. "Who told you?" "No one needed to," Henry chuckled. "It's written all over your face." Jessica lowered her head and pulled her coat tighter around her as a cold draft swept through the hallway. "The real question is," Henry continued, his voice deep and warm, "now that you've let your light show, are you ready for what comes next?" "Nothing's coming next." Jessica shook her head, almost pleading. "It was just a moment, that's all." Henry didn't argue. He simply looked at her with a quiet pride in his eyes. When you strike a match in a dark room, people notice. They can't help it. Jessica walked out of the hotel, her steps slow as she headed toward the bus stop. A strange feeling swelled inside her, part fear, part something else. Something alive, almost breathless. What she didn't know was that high above her, on the top floor of the hotel, Adrian Miles was on a phone call that would change everything. "Yes," he said, staring out at the Chicago skyline. "I need information about one of your housekeeping staff. She speaks fluent Mandarin. I believe I just found something extraordinary hiding in plain sight." The next morning, everything seemed unnervingly normal. Jessica had barely slept, her mind stuck on replay, revisiting yesterday's conversation, toggling between pride and dread. Had she crossed a line? What if Adrian had reported her? But no one said anything. No one looked at her any differently. Chloe maintained her usual air of indifference. "14th floor again today," Chloe said flatly. "And make sure the Miles Industries conference room is spotless before noon. Everything needs to be perfect." Jessica nodded, more relieved than she expected to feel. Maybe Adrian hadn't mentioned what happened. Maybe, to him, she was just a convenient fix for a temporary problem. Nothing more. She kept trying to convince herself that what happened yesterday didn't mean anything, just a passing flicker. But deep down, she knew better. Something inside her had changed. A part of her, the part that had longed to speak, was awake now, and it wouldn't go back to sleep. While cleaning the mirror in room 1409, Jessica caught sight of herself. She paused, not to check for streaks or smudges, but because for the first time in years she really saw herself. And staring back at her were her mother's eyes, filled with a question she still didn't know how to answer. "It didn't change anything," she whispered to her reflection. "It was just one moment." But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. Somewhere deep inside, she knew, some moments, no matter how brief, carry the power to change everything. At 11:45 a.m., Jessica arrived at the conference room to prepare for the meeting. She worked methodically, arranging notepads, refilling water pitchers, adjusting every chair to perfection. Just as she was finishing, Chloe walked in with two senior hotel managers. "Good, almost done," Chloe remarked, as if she were the only one who cared about doing things right. Then the door opened again, and Adrian Miles stepped in, flanked by two assistants. The hotel managers straightened, smiles snapping into place. "Mr. Miles, we trust everything's been to your satisfaction," one of them said smoothly. Adrian nodded politely, but his eyes didn't linger on them. He scanned the room until they landed on Jessica, who was trying to make herself invisible near the service entrance. "Actually," he said, "there's something specific I'd like to address." Jessica's stomach dropped. Here it is, she thought. The reprimand, the warning for overstepping my place. "Yesterday, something unusual happened," Adrian continued, his gaze still locked on Jessica. "One of your employees saved a multi-million-dollar deal with extraordinary language skills." The hotel managers exchanged confused glances. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miles," one said cautiously. "We weren't made aware of any staff assisting with translation. We have professional services for that." "You wouldn't know," Adrian replied, "because the person who helped me isn't one of your translators. She works in housekeeping." Every eye turned toward Jessica. She wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. Chloe let out a dismissive laugh. "There must be some mistake. No one on our housekeeping team." "Jessica," Adrian interrupted, addressing her directly. "That's your name, right?" Jessica nodded, unable to find her voice. "Would you mind translating a few sentences for the management team, just to verify?" The room fell silent. This was her nightmare, being dragged into the spotlight, judged, doubted. Every instinct in her body told her to run. But then she remembered. 15 minutes. 15 minutes when her voice had mattered. "I can do that," she whispered. Adrian began speaking about business expansion, cultural strategy, and communication across borders. Jessica translated smoothly, each sentence delivered with clarity and composure. The room seemed to hold its breath. When she finished, Adrian smiled. "Perfect translation, better than many professionals I've hired." Chloe's face drained of color. I had no idea," she stammered. "Clearly," Adrian said coolly, turning back to Jessica. "How long have you been studying Mandarin?" 3 years, sir. Self-taught." "Impressive," Adrian said, his eyes reflecting genuine respect. "Why didn't you ever pursue this professionally?" Jessica swallowed hard, then finally voiced the truth she had kept buried for years. "I never thought I was good enough. I don't have a degree or connections. I only studied for myself." Adrian nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. "I have a proposal for you. My company is expanding into the Asian market, especially China. We're looking for someone who understands not just the language, but the spirit of communication. Someone with natural ability and relentless commitment." Jessica stood frozen. "I'd like to offer you a position," he continued, "to start as a translator and cultural liaison for our upcoming negotiations in Shanghai. If it goes well, we'll discuss a more permanent role." The room seemed to shift around her. It couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. That I'm just someone with extraordinary talent who's been underestimated. Adrian finished for her. "Even by yourself?" Chloe stepped forward, her voice coated in that overly polished professional tone. "Mr. Miles, Jessica's talent is admirable, of course, but there are procedures. She doesn't hold credentials or corporate experience. It might be more appropriate to assign a certified translator, someone better suited to an executive environment." The tightened. Jessica felt herself shrink again. Small, out of place, unworthy, but Adrian cut through that moment like a blade. "You're Chloe Winters, correct?" he asked, voice level. "Let me ask you something. Yesterday, when the call came in from Shanghai, where were all these certified translators? Who stepped up and helped? Chloe had no answer. Jessica was the only one who combined capability with courage, Adrian continued. She saw a need and rose to meet it, even though it pushed her out of her comfort zone. That's exactly the kind of person I want on my team. He turned back to Jessica, his voice gentler now. Of course, the decision is yours. He knew this would be a life-altering choice for her. I'm not here to pressure you, he said. If you need time to think it over, I completely understand. But time felt suspended in that moment. Jessica stood at a crossroad. Two paths stretched before her. One was familiar, quiet, safe, invisible. The other, uncertain but filled with promise, pointed toward a version of herself she had never dared to fully become. She thought of her mother, whose dreams never made it past city limits. She thought of Henry's words, "Don't let the best parts of you die in silence." She thought of her own reflection that morning. The eyes of her mother, but lit with a courage that had finally awakened. I don't need time, Jessica said, her voice steadier than she expected. I'd be honored to accept your offer. The words felt like a thread snapping, severing the life she once knew from the one she was stepping into. She had just leapt from her small, safe shell into the wild unknown. And she didn't regret it. Adrian smiled with quiet approval. Excellent. We'll coordinate with your management to make the necessary arrangements. If possible, I'd like you to join our strategy session this afternoon. The hotel's senior manager, quick to align himself with opportunity, nodded enthusiastically. Of course. We'll release her from duty immediately. Chloe's face flushed red with thinly veiled anger, but she held it in. But what about her responsibilities here? My team is already short-staffed, and replacing her on such short notice will be a challenge, yes, the hotel manager interjected smoothly. But we'll manage. We're all thrilled for Jessica. Right, Ms. Winters? Chloe forced a smile. Of course, how fortunate for her. As the group dispersed to finalize arrangements, only Jessica and Adrian remained in the room. She still couldn't quite believe what had just unfolded. Thank you, she said softly, her eyes bright with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. I still don't understand why you'd believe in someone like me. Adrian studied her, his expression kind but unwavering. Someone like you? You mean someone who taught herself one of the world's hardest languages over 3 years and had the nerve to step up in a high-stakes moment? I don't believe in people like that. I invest in them. Before Jessica could respond, Chloe returned, her professionalism now edged with bitterness. Jessica, you'll need to return your uniform and collect your belongings, she said. Then, quieter, more pointed. Quite the Cinderella story, isn't it? But remember, when the clock strikes midnight, not everyone keeps the glass slipper. 2 days ago that comment might have stung. But now, Jessica simply smiled. Thank you for your concern, Chloe, but I think I'll decide which world I belong to. 3 hours later, Jessica sat at the Miles Industries strategy table, dressed in a borrowed business skirt and blouse. It wasn't a housekeeping uniform anymore, but it wasn't quite executive attire either. She sat quietly, listening closely, unsure when or if she should speak. Suddenly, Adrian turned to her. Jessica, you've been quiet. What's your perspective? Every eye in the room turned toward her. Once again, Jessica had a choice, to stay safe or to speak her truth. I believe, Jessica began, her voice steady though measured. This strategy overlooks key cultural factors. In Chinese business, relationships come before performance. If we focus only on efficiency, we risk coming across as too transactional. He went on to explain the concept of losing face, the importance of indirect communication, and the cultural value of patience. The more she spoke, the more her confidence grew. Heads around the table began to nod. Adrian watched her with open approval. By the end of the meeting, Jessica was no longer a silent observer. She had become a valuable contributor. Brandon's senior aide approached her afterward. "We're finalizing plans for the Shanghai trip. Do you have a passport?" Jessica shook her head. "I've never left Illinois." "No problem. We'll rush the paperwork. Adrian says you're essential." The word essential echoed in her mind. And this time, she left the hotel through the main lobby, not the service entrance. At the bus stop, Henry was waiting. "Heard something happened upstairs," he grinned. "Something about a housekeeper becoming essential." Jessica smiled softly. "How do you always know everything?" "I pay attention to everyone." She hesitated. "I'm still scared. What if I'm not who they think I am?" Henry nodded. "Fear and excitement feel the same. The only difference is the story you tell yourself." He looked at her warmly. "So, Jessica Parker, what's your story? That you got lucky? Or that you're finally becoming who you were meant to be?" As the bus approached, he gently nudged her forward. "Some lights, once lit, never go out." The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of training, preparation, and transformation. Jessica juggled crash courses in business, continued her Mandarin practice, and learned the nuances of corporate etiquette. Miranda, who had taken her under her wing, proved both firm and surprisingly patient. "You're picking this up faster than most MBAs," she remarked one day. "It's like you've been preparing for this your whole life." Maybe she had. The language she once studied to honor her mother had now become the bridge to her future. The day before departure, Jessica visited her mother's grave. "I'll see the world for both of us, Mom," she whispered, laying fresh flowers on the cold stone. That evening, a message lit up her phone. "Lobby bar? One last drink?" Henry was sitting there, for once not in uniform. "Look at you," he said with a warm smile. "Even the way you walk is different now." Jessica adjusted her blazer. "Still feels like dress-up. Like someone's going to find out I don't belong." "That feeling never really goes away," Henry replied. "Some people just learn to ignore it from a young age." She asked quietly, "Why did you believe in me?" His voice softened. "Because 30 years ago I was you. Different life, same fear. I missed my shot. Helping you. Maybe it's my way of making peace with that." Jessica smiled. "But it's not too late for you either." Henry chuckled. "Actually, I've got an interview coming up, head of security at the art museum. Watching you reminded me, there's always time for one more adventure." As they parted ways, he handed her a small, worn book. "Found this years ago. Couldn't read it, but I thought maybe it'll mean something to you now." The next morning at O'Hare Airport, Jessica joined the Miles Industries team, her heart pounding. As they prepared to board, a familiar voice broke the hum of conversation. It was Chloe, now joining the trip as the hotel's liaison. "Management thought it best that someone experienced represent Skyline," she said coolly. Adrian frowned slightly. "I wasn't informed of this addition." Jessica stayed quiet, steadying herself. For the next 14 hours, as the plane soared toward Shanghai, old doubts crept in. Did she really belong at this table? Or was she still just a cleaner in a borrowed suit? Shanghai emerged like a dream, dazzling and overwhelming. In the luxury hotel where they stayed, Jessica still caught herself scanning the carpet for stains, checking the placement of chairs. The line between who she was and who she was becoming was still blurry. The next morning, Miranda escorted her to meet Adrian. "Do you know why I brought you on this trip?" he asked. Because I speak Chinese? Adrian shook his head. I have dozens of people who speak Chinese, but you're the only one who had the courage to step up when others froze. That kind of courage can't be taught. At the negotiation table, Jessica met Mr. Tran from the Jung Corporation again. You were the voice from the other day? Adrian told me. Very impressive, he said. Jessica responded fluently. Throughout the meeting, she wasn't just a translator. She was the bridge, the one who diffused tension, the invisible heartbeat between two cultures. By the third day, no one could deny her presence was essential. Even Chloe had to concede. You're better than I expected, but let's see how long this little fairy tale lasts. Jessica didn't respond. She didn't have to anymore. When Mr. Tran turned and said, Miss Parker, I'd like to continue our discussion on regional strategy, the look on Chloe's face said everything. That evening, Adrian raised his glass. To new beginnings, and to seeing the extraordinary when it's right in front of us. Out on the balcony, overlooking the dazzling skyline of Shanghai, Jessica stood in quiet reflection. From hotel housekeeper to negotiation partner, the transformation wasn't just about what she had learned. It was about being seen and seeing herself clearly for the first time. Chloe appeared beside her, her voice softer than before. I underestimated you. Jessica smiled. So did I. Adrian joined them. So what's next for you? He asked. Jessica gazed into the distance. I want to see more of the world, not just in books. He smiled. I think that can be arranged. Jessica pulled out the old book Henry had given her, flipping to a page he'd marked. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and her first step was choosing to speak up. 1 year later, Jessica stood at the podium of the Skyline Suites, the very hotel where she once silently pushed her cleaning cart down endless hallways. All eyes in the grand ballroom were on her, Director of Asian Market Development at Miles Industries. But Jessica Parker didn't flinch. She stood centered under the spotlight, calm and certain, as if she had finally arrived at the place she was always meant to be. Transformation isn't always about becoming someone new, she began, her voice clear as she swept her gaze across the room. Sometimes, it's the journey back to who we truly are. In the audience, Adrian Miles sat quietly, pride shimmering in his eyes. Beside him, Henry, now head of security at the Art Institute of Chicago, nodded, his eyes glassy with emotion. When I first walked into this hotel, Jessica continued, I believed I only belonged in the shadows. I buried my talents, convinced they weren't worth sharing. Her voice didn't shake. Every word landed like a heartbeat. She glanced at Chloe, at former colleagues, at managers who had once looked right past her. My turning point began with a conversation in a language no one thought I knew. I started learning Mandarin in memory of my mother, but I never imagined it would bring me here, today. From the front row, Miranda, the mentor who had guided her, smiled. This past year, Jessica said, her voice growing stronger, I've learned that the biggest limits we face aren't external. They live in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we deserve, and whether we're enough. She held up the old book Henry had given her, filled with Chinese proverbs he couldn't read, but that now carried a quiet wisdom. A wise friend once told me, the best parts of us might never be seen, but don't let them die in silence. That changed everything. Her words floated in the stillness of the ballroom, then rippled outward like waves. We often wait for permission to shine, but our worth doesn't come from permission, it comes from choice. When we stop hiding, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to move forward anyway. At the back of the room, housekeepers, kitchen staff, and service workers, the ones who had once been like her, listened with hopeful, shining eyes. Last year I cleaned this room. Today I lead international negotiations. The only difference is I finally gave myself permission to be seen." The ballroom erupted in applause, not just in celebration but in recognition of a journey born from quiet bravery. As Jessica stepped away from the podium, she caught her reflection in a pane of glass, no longer the timid girl who avoided attention, but a woman who had stepped into her own light, radiant and whole. That evening at the reception, Jessica stood beside Henry. They raised their glasses, bathed in warm golden light and the soft hum of music. "Not bad," Henry said with a wink. "For two people who used to be invisible." Jessica smiled. "I still think about that day, when I almost didn't answer the phone. One moment of hesitation and everything could have been different." "But it wasn't," Henry replied gently. "And that's what changed everything." A young woman in a housekeeping uniform approached shyly. "Miss Parker, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story really touched me." Jessica took her hand, warm and sincere. "What's your name?" "Maria," the young woman whispered. "Maria, whatever dream you're carrying, don't let it go. It matters. It's worth everything," Jessica said softly. As Maria walked away, Henry leaned over and murmured, "There you go, passing the flame." Jessica nodded, her eyes calm yet bright. "The least I can do, since someone once did the same for me." Toward the end of the reception, Adrian approached with Mr. Tran from Shanghai beside him. "Mr. Tran says your speech should be required listening for every business leader," Adrian said with a grin. Mr. Tran nodded. "In our culture, the loudest voice is not always the wisest. You've proven that quiet strength can move mountains." A little later, Jessica stepped out onto the balcony, the Chicago skyline glittering below like a living galaxy. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an old photo, her mother's. "We're seeing the world together now, Mom," she whispered, "just like you always wanted." Through the glass, Jessica noticed a housekeeper adjusting a vase of flowers, head down, shoulders hunched, exactly as she used to be just a year ago. Jessica smiled. The woman caught her gaze, smiled back, and straightened her posture, just a little. In that fleeting moment, Jessica understood something deep and true. Her journey had never just been about achievements or titles. It was about being seen, and learning to truly see others. Because the most powerful gift we can offer isn't success. It's authenticity. It's the courage to show up fully as ourselves. If Jessica's story stirred something within you, a dream not yet lived, a voice that's been quiet too long, or a gift still waiting in the dark, don't let it stay buried. Subscribe now to Moments of Quiet Truth, where we believe that within every person lies an extraordinary story waiting to be told. Thank you for listening. Your dream matters, your voice deserves to be heard, and the world is waiting for you to step into the light.